Good morning, everyone. My name is Grayla Renault, and I am the host for this session, taking students on a deep dive into text. Our presenter today is Kristine Kelly. I have a few housekeeping issues that I'm going to take care of here. So we want you to use the chat. So please sign into the chat. Let us know who is here. And then also, if you are having any tech issues, direct that directly to me. But for any questions that you have, make sure those are addressed to everyone. We are going to try to read the questions aloud so that you hear what somebody is asking before it's answered. And then also just want you to know that this session is being recorded and that the recording will be available on our YouTube channel, and the date for that release is to be determined, but we'll make sure to let you know. I also want to let you know that the webinar evaluation will automatically appear at the end of the webinar. Please remember to give some feedback because that's a gift for Kristine. And then also your proof of attendance will be sent to you via Zoom, and that will be for each session that you attend, okay? I think I've done everything I need to do, so I'm going to turn it over to Kristine and let her introduce herself. Oh, you know what? I did forget one thing. We're going to do a poll. So as we have people coming in, let me get that set up. All right. And I am going to launch our poll. All right, responses are coming in. Going to give it a minute or two more as I realize people are still coming into the room. All right. So here I'm going to share the results. So as you can see, we have a large number of instructors in the room, and next are instructional specialists. So welcome, welcome. I know this is going to be a great session. I've worked with Kristine before and I've heard her presentations. So without any further ado, Kristine, take over.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad that you're here. And I'm going to go ahead here. Okay. So, good morning. Before we get started, I just want to briefly give this disclaimer. The content or opinions expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect or present the views, positions, or policies of the Maryland Department of Labor, nor does the mention of trade names, commercial products, or organizations imply an official endorsement by the Maryland Department of Labor. And with that, good morning, and I am so glad that you're here. And I am Kristine Kelly, and I am the Minnesota Adult Education Literacy Coordinator. And basically all that means is if it has to do with language, writing, reading, speaking, and listening, anything to do with those things, I have some hand in it, and that includes the standards, that includes evidence-based reading instruction and STAR. I've been a teacher for 25 years, teaching multiple levels of students, and I am originally a 7-12 language arts person with a K-12 reading background. And so I'm also in the process of starting my dissertation, which is going to be about the Minnesota adult ed system and factors that influence how we are incorporating writing into adult ed instruction. So we'll see what comes out of that. So our agenda today is I'm going to talk a little bit about creating text sets, which is something I certainly did not create this idea. It's been around. You may have seen text sets if you use any platforms like ReadWorks or Newsela or Common Lit. Sawbase in Massachusetts, I know, has done some work with this. It's a great way to collect texts and go deep with students. We're going to talk about some pre-reading activities activities, collecting evidence, which is a key part of using text sets, in my opinion, to give students a place to collect evidence, to collect vocabulary that they're seeing multiple times, and then some post-reading activities. So please chat any questions in the chat box. I'm just getting myself adjusted here. I do have another monitor, so when I'm looking up, I am not watching morning television. I'm looking to see the chat box. And yeah, so what I do want you to know right away is whatever I do, I provide. So I will be getting a list of participants, and I will send out a PDF of the slide deck. I will also send out a Google Doc. All the activities you see today are in that Google Doc, so that you can take them, you can make a copy of the doc, you can adapt the activities, you can do whatever you'd like with them. And then also the text set that I talk about, the cell phone text set, that is also going to be there as well. And that is linked. So if you want to, you can look at the different texts. So I'm so happy to share everything that I have. So when I plan instruction, I come from this place where I ask myself some really key questions. Now, I know every state works with the college and career readiness standards a little differently, but my focus with teachers and with myself always is really focusing in on the ideas of complexity, evidence, and knowledge, and how I'm going to hit those. Because I know if I hit those shifts, I'm going to hit standards. So I really try to pare it down, and I ask myself some key questions. And one of those that I always ask when I'm planning is what is the text? And how am I providing opportunities for students to engage with complex text in addition to other texts? So this can include whatever a text is. So read alouds, video, visuals, etc. Then I always ask myself about vocabulary. And as I'm moving into planning, how are students going to interact and unpack academic vocabulary at lower levels, below high beginning ESL? Certainly, it isn't an academic vocabulary focus. There are a lot of other words students need to learn. So you can generalize this just to vocabulary, but really thinking about how students are not only going to read vocabulary, but unpack it. So then I move into evidence, and I want to, I ask myself, am I creating questions with text, or the tasks that I create, are they building? So they're building into some higher level thinking. If I'm using one text, am I having students do 2 or 3 reads of it, and each time a different purpose? How are students talking about what they're reading? Or when I say reading, I mean, it could be reading in quotation marks, a video or a visual. How are they talking about evidence, and how are they writing about evidence? And then am I building instruction around an essential question? We'll talk a little bit about this, that I know that in adult ed, we have intermittent learners, but we also have regular learners as well. And building around an essential question kind of helps guide the deep dive that we want students to do. And then am I using multiple texts and having students compare and contrast texts? So here I feel like I'm hitting, if I can answer most of these questions, if not all, and always thinking about what am I doing that my students could be doing. And what I'm going to talk about today really targets these areas here: the complex text, building around an essential question, and using multiple texts. And as I said, I know that in adult ed, we do have intermittent attendees. Recently, I dug back into some learner persistence research, and it was a good reminder that in general, we tend to have 5 different groups of students, and the students may move between those groups from, depending on the situation. But we have long-term, short-term, mandatory sometimes, the tryout student who isn't sure if they're ready to be back in school, and then the intermittent attendees. And I know that we do need to plan because we do have students who are in and out. But we do also have irregular attendees as well. I always had like a core in my class, and we need to think about both groups of students. Intermittent learners do need to be able to jump in and feel connected as quickly as possible. And regular learners express, when surveyed, that they need some stability in the instruction to persist. They want to feel like they're moving forward and not always, going back and circling all the time. So it's a delicate dance. So today we're going to talk about how you can use text sets for both groups. So let's talk about text sets very briefly, and then we're going to jump in. So I would like to pose the question, and please use the chat box. Please put in the chat box if you've used a text set. You might know what it is, you might not. I would say a text set is maybe 3 texts up to 12 texts. And the text set could be a print text, it could be a short video, it could be a visual. That's a text set. Love it. So please let me know so I can get a sense if you've used text sets. So they're curated sequences of resources, and they build knowledge around a topic or an essential question. And I've gotten to be quite quick at creating text sets. I kind of have my go-to places. I see ReadWorks here, and ReadWorks is one of my places that I like to go. And we're seeing some of our free platforms, or in the case of News-ELA, some free content that are already creating some paired texts or some text sets for us to use. I love to see that some of you are and some of you aren't, which is great because hopefully this will spark you. Essential questions. I love essential questions, and I love them because they're meaty and they're really engaging. They're open-ended, so they don't have a yes or no answer, and there may not be a definitive answer at the end of using a text set and doing activities, but there's lots of room for discussion, some debate, building up that higher order thinking. Students are developing the skills to recognize evidence, to organize evidence, organize their thinking, and use their knowledge in different ways. Always creates additional questions. And sometimes the question I get, or that I've gotten from my adults, has been, well, what's the answer? And I'll say, well, you know what? In the case of, I did an essential question on what is the relationship between literacy and power. And, I like the fact that I can empower adults to come up with some thinking of their own and kind of determine what the question means to them. And it guides a choice of text or activities. Some quick examples. What does it mean to be truly healthy? I love this one. I picked this one up from a program I recently worked with. How does the media shape our view of the world and ourselves? Healthy ways to relieve stress. We can use these at any level. I mean, we can use an essential question. It might be, I've even seen, what makes a good friend? Should the government increase the minimum wage? I've seen this with high school equivalency students, really focused on digging and then developing writing on one of the, taking a stand on one side or another. What personal qualities have helped you deal with conflict and change? How do rules and laws create an effective government? The relationship between freedom and responsibility. This was actually a social studies teacher at on my team. How does the Bill of Rights impact our lives today? I did this in a GED prep classroom. So instead of just trying to cover as much social studies content as I could, or as much government content. We did a deep dive, and within that, students got a really strong understanding of how this document impacts our lives all the time, and they developed some good analysis skills, some good application skills. So creating a text set. Traditional texts. So print texts, the text might come from a core text that you like to use, or it might come from ReadWorks, right? Or it might come from ESL library or Common Lit. And we want to think about a range of difficulty. We want to have some texts that are going to be challenging, that we're going to need to support students in, but also texts that are on the easier end, where we can build background knowledge and work with strategies that students aren't struggling with. We want to incorporate some digital texts. One thing, though, is with digital texts, there tend to be a lot of, if we go to a blog or we go to a website, lots of distractions, often videos that pop up, ads and things like that. Sometimes with my students, depending on the level of student, I do explicitly kind of talk about that, show the website and say, there are some things here that, look like they might be part of what we're working on, but they're not. So I just mediate that a little bit. Videos. I love videos. Videos are great for everyone. They're great for multi-level classes. Many of my students, my English language learners, had a much greater oral vocabulary than a print vocabulary, and they were able to access information a little bit easier. They're great for listening practice. I know that for a lot of my high school equivalency students, they're great talkers, but they aren't necessarily always the greatest listeners. So, intentional listening activities are important, whether my students were English language learners or not. Ed Puzzles, I'm just watching this. Yes, Ed Puzzles is a great resource for students that you can either borrow resources that have already been created, or borrow videos or use videos that teachers have created all over the country, or you can take a video from virtually anywhere and you can stop the video where you want and insert questions. Graphics, absolutely, all kinds of graphics, and not only pictures, but charts, graphs, visual information. I did a session recently talking about combining numeracy and literacy. And if we're teaching our students to be critical readers, there's a numeracy aspect, because numbers and stats are present in a lot of the informational text that students read. And we want students to have some understanding of some of the language around those numbers and stats. And certainly that just because it's data doesn't mean there's not a point of view behind it. Doesn't mean there's not a purpose for using it or displaying it. So everything is focused on an essential question. Building a text set for instruction, choose your essential question, choose a variety of texts. I'm going to give you a few examples here. Consider the sequence of texts in building maybe from easier, more accessible texts where students are building knowledge and gaining vocabulary, moving into more complex texts on that topic, and then determine how students are going to interact. So we all have activities that we like to use. We have speaking and listening activities and reading comprehension activities, etc. And those are up to us to decide what we want to do. So very quickly, building around an essential question. So this is how it can work in a classroom where you have a core group of students who are attending regularly, and then students who might be there on a Monday and not come back until Thursday, or might be there for their first day on a Tuesday and not come back until the following Thursday, or you're teaching and all of a sudden you have a brand new student and you are in the middle of your text set. So when we think about it, each of these texts is going to have an activity with it or some activities and an opportunity for students to stop and gather some more information around a question. So you might have students who are there every day. Lesson 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've spent as much as 6 weeks on an essential question, but within that, we have we've done vocabulary work, we have annotated text, we have done comprehension, we've done fluency work, we've done we've used graphic organizers, we've written about the text. So they're going deep, but they're working on a lot of different strategies. So you might have a student who's there the whole time. You might also have a student who comes on the first day, lesson 1, then doesn't come back until lesson 4. Well, that's still 2 texts that the student has not had an opportunity to work with and gather evidence. You might have a student who comes in for lesson 2 and 3. Again, they have an opportunity to work with a few texts. I've had students come in on that last text. It is only 1 text. This is why I give students opportunities to choose how they might respond to that essential question. I may have a learner who's just built some knowledge around 1 text, but they can still participate in the conversation because it's still around the same essential question. So this is something that I have done. Again, if you're a teacher who has to think about coverage, particularly I notice with high school equivalency, like we really want to build as much background knowledge as we can for the test. I ask you to kind of balance that coverage with the time that we want to spend. A couple more slides, and then I'm going to ask you to engage a little bit. When we talk about complex texts, this was a great workshop that I went to. It was about text complexity. And this is something that that teachers say to me often. I can't give students texts that are too hard for students to read. No. I mean, we don't ever want our students to just be so frustrated that they feel bad or they don't want to come back to class, or they continue to think that being a good reader is something that you're born with and you can't develop. But we can mediate difficult texts. And sometimes we change text. I know because I've done it. I have simplified sentence structure. I've simplified vocabulary, sometimes depending on what we were going to use the text for. We can also change what we do with the text. And instead of changing the text itself. And so we want to think about how can we almost use texts as a way to pre-teach and build knowledge to engage with other texts. Again, I'll show you an example. For a long time, we talk about students' independent instructional and frustration level. And frustration level is not the same as productive struggle. Frustration level is when you give a student a text that's complex for them, and then you say, go take this and good luck, and hope you can work it out on your own. That's frustration. Productive struggle is when we know it's complex, we've decided what parts are likely going to be complex, and then we provide supports for students to actually be able to engage with that. We are there with them every step of the way. That's the difference. And productive struggle with support, that creates reading gains. We don't want students engaging in productive struggle every minute with text. Sometimes we use really easy texts because we want students to practice or just to build some knowledge, or to just read for pleasure and not wrestle with the text. Or we want to teach a strategy and we don't want them wrestling with the text and the strategy. Sometimes we want to really ramp it up and we want students to have an opportunity to engage and stretch themselves. So some quick examples of scaffolding, then we'll move into a little bit about what this looks like. Actually, you know what? I'm going to pose that to the group. Please, in the chat box, what is one of your key scaffolds? What is the support you think, okay, so we're going to work on this. We're going to work on this text. And I know that I want to help them. I want to help support them. And so what is a go-to scaffold that you like to use to help support students? And that can be helping the student individually. That could be helping students work together. What are some scaffolds? KWL. Yes, one of my issues with KWL, and this was on me, is I was forgetting to go back. KWLs, if you're going to use them with multiple text, I was forgetting we did it as a pre-reading. I forgot. Every time we do another text, go back. What more have we learned? What new questions do we have? What questions have we answered? I always forgot to do that. Yep, activating previous knowledge, connecting, that relevance piece is so huge. Topic sentence, topic, controlling idea, the bread. I see that a few times. Graphic organizers, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Great. SQ3R. You want to know something? Somebody brought that up a few weeks ago in a workshop. I haven't thought of SQ3R. My students used to love that because it was so concrete. So it's great to be reminded of that. Annotation, templates, 5 Ws. These are great. We all have some go-tos, right? Identify, that's great. To identify, a lot of times we have students look over a text and we ask them to identify words they don't know, but having them go in with identifying 5 to 10 words they do know, that's a great way to kind of get them ready and remind them that they know things. Well, some different ways, and you've hit on a lot of these. I see the pictures as well. Doing some pre-teaching. And that can include key vocabulary concepts or grammar structures. I've done that when there's been a grammar structure that's appeared. I had a text once that was loaded with adjective clauses, and my students were getting lost about what the antecedents were when they were reading. So we actually worked a little bit on adjective clauses and then applied that to the text. Setting that clear purpose, especially if you do multiple reads. Using an apprentice text in visuals, so a less complex text that builds that background knowledge. Reading a passage aloud. I don't care how advanced my students were. I have always read aloud at times to students, just because my students have a silent comprehension score on a TABE or a CASA goals that shows their reading in the 10th, 11th, 12th grade. Doesn't mean they have rate and prosody with fluency. And so I like to read aloud. Defining, highlighting transition words, pronouns, and their antecedents for those of you. And even at higher levels, students can get lost. I've had students say, well, it says it. What is it? Because they're having a hard time matching it back with the antecedent. Love it. Listen to the text without reading it. That's a first read. That makes it more accessible to everyone. Providing partially completed graphic organizers. Sometimes with students, I would partially fill in the graphic organizer, or I would use sentence stems or frames in the graphic organizer. Using excerpts. Sometimes a close read of text is just one paragraph of a longer text where you decide we're going to stop and do a deep dive here with this particularly rich or dense paragraph. I've done it with a sentence, a particularly difficult sentence with multiple ideas where we stop, we dig in. Picking rich texts and creating activities to sustain students through multiple reads. My boss, Patsy Egan, always says, instead of using 10 texts, do 10 things with one text. Using sentence or paragraph frames. And summarizing as you go. This can be part of annotating. You can show students how to do this, do it together. And then have students do it on their own or do it in pairs and track and write in the margins or write on post-it notes if they are working in a book that they cannot write in. So I'm going to show you a complex text set, and then I'm going to ask you about some of your favorite pre-reading activities. Here's an example of a cell phone set. In what ways do cell phones impact the way we live and communicate? That was my key question, and a few supporting questions, the benefits and the possible harms. So what I want to do is I want to show you kind of how each text would work with the other texts. And here right away, News ELA and Common Lit. News ELA can be great. You can adjust the Lexile levels. Although, be careful, because sometimes in adjusting the text to be at a lower Lexile level, the text can become more complex, because when sentences are shortened, sometimes the relationships between the ideas can become more complex for learners. So simply lowering the Lexile, you still want to make sure you dig in there and you see where some of those features that kind of pull a text together might be missing from a higher level. Introduce important vocabulary and one point of view. I've got a positive and a negative here right away. And I want to use something that's going to introduce the vocabulary and a little bit about the background that's going to be pretty easy for students to access, to start that knowledge. ReadWorks, I don't know if you've seen their news debates where they have a pro and a con. They're a little bit lower level. And again, even some of my higher level students, they struggle with informational text and with pulling evidence and forming an argument. So these are very doable texts for like an intermediate level student, and they're expanding their knowledge about some pros and cons. I love videos. I would use this probably as my first text. There's no language at all. It's 2.5 minutes long. It's got some just really powerful images of kind of text or cell phones today. And there's a little bit of music. It's very accessible for learners. I would include this video here. Again, it's just a little over 2.5 minutes. It's a news story, and that's kind of a familiar format for students. It also includes some additional point of views of students and educators. These are a little bit harder. They're still short, but they're a little bit more technical. But at the point that I would use these or one of these, students have had the opportunity now to build up some knowledge. They've had the opportunity to work with some vocabulary. So I wouldn't lead with one of these videos, but they would be ready once they did worked with some other text. Bringing in some digital text, authentic websites. One is from a career blog. One is from a pediatrician talking about children and cell phones. These are really relevant for adults. These are the kinds of websites that adults engage with. Some graphic information, the Pew Research Center, reviews.org. I would not have students work with all of the charts and graphs and statistics, but I would pull from here or have them focus in on some of them. So they're working with some of that graphic information. Again, now they have the benefit of some vocabulary. They have the benefit of building some of that background knowledge. The graphic information is more accessible. And I like to pull visuals from Pixabay, Pexels, Unsplash, and have 4 or 5 visuals that I'm going to be able to just pull from and use in different activities. Also, this would be a great activity just to put this up to students and have them make some predictions about what the topic is going to be, right? And because, you know, there's some pro and cons, there's school, there's the idea of connecting people. Of course, there's the cell phone itself. So lots of goals we have, so much to teach. But think about where you do have time, where you can include, if you're not already, time to spend around an essential question, thinking about big questions, collecting evidence to be able to answer some of these big questions thoroughly. Coverage versus understanding. This is what teachers have to do. We have to walk this line all the time. And think about what will stick. The coverage I was doing wasn't sticking very well with my high school equivalency students. But when we actually engaged with the topic by talking about it, writing about it, reading about it, working with vocabulary, doing contextualized grammar, I feel like they developed bigger skills and strategies that they would be able to apply to any number of things that they were reading. So once more, and then I'm going to pause. These are key questions. These are included in the handout. And I really try to think about these questions, because I know that if I'm building around these key questions, I'm hitting standards. And even if the college and career readiness standards aren't something that you explicitly focus on, you can know that you're tapping into just research about reading and writing, and you're tapping into the research. Any questions when I pause here? And then I'm going to have you share some ideas. We will have a stretch break. And we will have a chance to do a little bit of reflection. Well, please pose questions if you have any. So I know that you gave some examples of scaffolding, but what you have a text. And it could be a visual, it could be a video, it could be a read aloud, it could be a print text, it could be any number of things. What do you start out with? How do you introduce or get students engaged in that text or preparing them to read? Again, they might be similar or the same to the scaffolding question, but what is the first thing you like to do? Warm up questions. Yeah, get them really thinking. An image or a video, describe it. Have you ever heard of, all right, seeing what they know? Yeah, videos and images, they're so powerful. We can do so much with them. Yeah, and of course, we have to think along two lines: building background knowledge and activating what students already know. State the purpose and audience. Yeah, do a little skim over, read titles, subtitles, discuss what we're reading. I know that slow reveal graphs are popular. I've seen it in a lot of numeracy sessions where you just reveal a small portion. I think a version of that that I have used with students as I'm trying to kind of get them motivated and engaged around a topic is to choose 5 or 6 images that kind of build. They get a little bit, they start out kind of abstract, and then each picture is another clue closer to what we're going to be talking about or reading about. And then one by one on a slide, I reveal the picture. That's kind of my version of a slow reveal graph. Analyze structure of the written text. Yeah, plug into their own interests. Relate it. Relevance is key to persistence with our adult learners. You know, they want to know how it's connected to them. They want to know how it's connected to their goals. Predict the author's point of view. These are great. I'm going to show you some, and as I'm showing you, I'm going to ask you when we get to the end of these pre-reading activities, I'm going to ask you to think about how you might adapt one of them or how you're doing something similar and might tweak what you're doing. These are highly adaptable to different levels of students. The first one is possible sentences. And as we're going through, please chat if you have done an activity like this, some version of it. This happens to be possible sentences where I go through and I look at the first text or even a few of the texts, pull some key vocabulary, and then ask students to write 3 to 5 sentences that could possibly appear in the text. So they're doing some big predicting. And I tell them the topic, and I limit them no more than 3 words or phrases in each sentence, because I've had students who are like, look, I've used 6 words and the sentence doesn't really say a lot. So I try to limit them. I have students who I say, look, write 3 to 5 sentences and use 1 word per sentence, right? Write 3 sentences, use 1 word, okay? I've also done this orally where students work in a pair and they create some sentences together. And so I like this because it gets them thinking, it gets them thinking about relationships, it gets them kind of categorizing information. And then you can stop there, or you can come back to it and give students opportunities to go back and say, okay, we just read this text. Now go back on your sentences, the predictions. And if you can you mark it true? Can you mark it false? Or mark it you still don't know, you haven't come across anything? And then you can even take it one more, and after reading, you can ask students to rewrite the sentences to match the content in the text, to correct the sentences if they were false, and to include which text helped them. A lot of different ways you can go about this. You can use fewer words. You can really guide them through this. You can, I have students who want to write paragraphs with the words, and then students who want to write individual sentences. You can decide how many sentences you want them to write, but it really is a great way to kind of get them thinking about the text and already kind of working with some of the ideas. Knowledge rating charts. Please put in the chat if you have used a knowledge rating chart. I know this was really big with STAR, Student Achievement in Reading, but STAR didn't create it. This is a great way for students to kind of pre-assess where they're at with words. And I like knowledge rating charts because it shows students there are different levels of knowing words. It isn't just, I know the word or I don't know the word. A lot of times they have more knowledge than they think they do. And sometimes it's just, I know I've seen it. I know I've heard it. And that's something, right? That's different from I've never seen it or heard it. So you can have students fill in the words that they want, but you can also give them words to consider. These happen to be words that appear multiple times through the texts. And students give them a little bit of time to honestly assess where they're at with these words. And really thinking about what are some really high utility words, central words, repeated words. Thinking about pre-teaching, we want to limit our pre-teaching to about 3 to 7 words. And when there are words that are very clearly, that have clear context clues, and we want students to work with those, we may want to hold off on those words and not pre-teach them and draw their attention and have them productively struggle. But this is, and then go back and have students reassess themselves and do a check mark in a different color. It's such a concrete way for them to see that they're moving to the left. They may not be comfortable with all the words at the end, but there's a really good chance that they've certainly seen the word then, so they can move things out of column 1, they can move things into column 3 and column 4. I've also seen this done where you can actually take sentences from the text, and you can direct students to look at the word in bold and then check it. I know it, I've seen it, I don't know this word. Go back to the sentence and then see if you can't find a clue to creating an initial definition. So this digs a little bit deeper, but again, students are assessing, and then they are actually, instead of us telling them what extended withdrawal interfere despite means, they are looking at context clues that can help them struggle a little bit with the word. Anticipation guides. Please let me know if you've used anticipation guides. You can adapt these to go low. You can adapt these up to your highest level high school equivalency students. The key is to activate knowledge and also bring up some assumptions about a topic. And they can be very motivating for students, and they can challenge what students may know about a topic. They also are good for re-examining thinking and pushing students to find evidence. Basically, students get a set of statements, they can check what they agree with, they can rank them, they can discuss them, they can do it and then get into small groups or partners and talk about their responses and why. They can do a quick write based on the statements about what they think the text is going to be about, but they need to go back. So here's one example. Again, this is in the handout. The question: in what ways do cell phones impact the way we live and communicate? So these are meant to be statements that are going to create debate, right? Like, cell phones make our lives better. Cell phones cause conflict between people. And so students get to go through and go, I agree, I disagree. And I say just in general, because there's always the student who says, well, I'm a little bit here and a little bit there. And then these really encourage discussion. And then after reading a text or a few texts, give them a few minutes to go back and go, have you changed at all in any of these, for any of these statements? And they can record evidence. You don't have to have the evidence column. It's useful just to have students do this and discuss before. I see this partnering and have students take sides. It really is a great way to see kind of where the class is as far as, where they might be. I often use this to find the people who are on which side, just so that I can, if I have a class that's really leaning to one side, then I really try to play devil's advocate a lot to get them thinking on the other side. Sentence starters. So many times, and I always give a choice to students when I use a video, and it can be a video like this one. It can be any kind of video. And we don't always do a super deep dive. Like, I don't do a video and say, okay, now here's 15 questions about the video. Sometimes we watch a very short video and I say, okay, so pick one of the sentence starters, and I'm going to give you just a couple minutes. I like this. It's low ceiling, which, because it's choice, so students, they can connect to it. They can just talk about how it makes them feel. They can express if they're wondering about something about the video. These are just a great way to get students doing some low impact writing. And it's right. You don't have to collect them all and edit them all or anything. You can have them share. You can have them share, turn and share. Quick writes. So quick writes, of course, students have to have some writing ability. They're low stakes and informal. And the hardest part for my students is they're not focused on careful writing. This can be tough for my English language learners who see writing equals correct. And that's what writing is about. And I try really hard to break my students out of that. There's lots of purposes for writing. It's really good for activating prior knowledge or reflecting. You can use anything for a prompt. You can support them with stems or frames, and they can translanguage. And an example of the translanguaging is I had a class and I had several learners who were able to write in their first language. And one in particular, she was from Togo, and French was her native language. When we're doing a quick write, I would say, write. If you can't remember or think of how to say it or write it in English, but you can write it in your first language, write it in your first language, switch back to English as quickly as possible, and keep going. This is not my idea. This is from a great book about writing between languages, that it's a support, because the goal here is ideas. The goal here is not perfect writing. And so the translanguaging aspect, again, the key is she would move into French for just like even sometimes a few words, and then she would jump right back to English, but it kept her writing. An example of the instructions I would give: 3 minutes in this case, use the time to write, don't worry about the spelling, grammar, organization, and then a reminder depending on the class and depending on their ability to write in a home language. We have to talk. They would always feel like it was cheating. And I said, no, it's using one of your greatest tools, your first language, to keep the stream of ideas going. So which activity created a spark? Anything that you saw or that you kind of do or that you do, but you got a new idea about it? How could you adapt or use one of these activities? And again, going back, the quick writes, using sentence starters with videos, anticipation guides, using some kind of way for students to assess themselves, and vocabulary, possible sentences, those prediction sentences. Yes, Elizabeth. And this is really, I know there's still there's some controversy about translanguaging. And we've really kind of dove into it in my state. One of the people who's taught me a lot about it is Betsy Parrish, who's a big ESL person. We don't want them to use it to lean on, and to take the place of learning English. We want to use it as a tool. It's a great tool. It's an amazing tool. But the ultimate goal, of course, is developing English. Video sentence starters. Yeah, this is something I talk about. Think about, where am I having students talk about the text or do an oral activity, and they're using the speaking as a scaffold to just some quick writing. So a lot of times students have really gotten some ideas orally and now have the support they actually need to maybe put down their thoughts in quick writing. By the way, the reason that this was suggested in this book is that when we have mixed groups of students whose primary level is English and English language learners, and we are using quick writing, the goal is to keep writing. What the writer found was that some of his English language learners would stop because they wouldn't know how to say something in English. And that some of those English language learners were expressing to the teacher, I look around and other people are writing, I stop, and it makes me feel funny. So if they are able to translanguage, they can keep writing. And the students said to the author that they felt more like they didn't stand out, that they were able to just do the activity like everyone else was. Possible sentences, going back. This in my golf swing. My dad always told me, he said, you have a great golf swing, you don't follow through. And that's the whole key. So collecting evidence. We're going to take a stretch break here in about 10 minutes. So when students are reading, okay, when they are actually doing the reading, what's an activity that you like, kind of a go-to activity that you like students to do when they're reading? And also, along with that is, if students are reading, how are they recording their thinking? How are they tracking evidence? How are they making meaning, being metacognitive, thinking about what they're reading? How are students doing that? Graphic organizers. Graphic organizers were a great idea when I started teaching in 1995, and they're still a great idea. Post-its. I never have enough Post-its. You can do so many things with them. For when I taught college, students would always say, I can't write in the book because I want to sell it back. You can put Post-it notes, get the small ones, annotate on Post-it notes. Highlighters. Dividing the reading with annotated labeled parts. That's awesome. These are great ideas. A lot of times we can do many things before to prep the students for reading, and then we do activities afterwards so they can demonstrate their knowledge. But the during reading is really important for students to be actively engaging with the text. So output requires input. We often ask students to speak about a topic, to write about a topic. We have to make sure we're giving them input so that they've got a lot to draw from, and that they have a way to collect and make sense of this input. Good question here. I'm not seeing all the posts in chat. Are people just posting to host? Make sure that you're posting to everyone in the chat, because there's really great things happening in the chat. Eye charts. Eye chart is not a creation of mine. The first time I saw this was Doug Buell. He is out of Madison, Wisconsin, and it's just a way to really kind of get students ultra focused on some questions and making sure they're recording information from sources. So down the left is a list of 5 of the sources from that text that I showed you. There is a column or a row there, what we know. So we do want students to be able to talk about what they already know. The first 2 questions would be questions that I would pose to students as a whole class. Like, we're all reading for how cell phones benefit us. We're all reading about how cell phones harm us. Now, questions 3 and questions 4, or you can just have 1 additional question, or you could have 3 additional questions. Students can generate their own questions. The class together can. But the key is that it gives them some targeted means to, okay, we're going to read text, watch out, cell phones can be addictive. So what information did I get about how cell phones can benefit us, how they harm us? My other questions, any important vocabulary that just kept showing up that I want to make sure that I write down, because I want to have some vocabulary to work with as we move through these texts. This, you can do it electronically very easily. You can also do it just on paper. I've seen an activity like this where teachers keep it on a whiteboard, like throughout as they're reading, they just keep recording evidence as a class. There's a lot of different ways to do this. Another way is an evidence collection chart. And that is if you are building students' skills at making an argument or writing persuasively, where you say, look, you're either going to choose that cell phones impact the way we live in beneficial ways, that they impact in harmful ways, or a little bit of both. And through that lens, that's where you're going to use. You think cell phones impact the way we live and communicate in beneficial ways? Well, as we work through a text, or as you're reading one text, jot down key evidence that supports the claim that you want to make, and any relevant vocabulary. They can also do this in pairs. Sabes has, in Massachusetts, they have with their text sets what's called a rolling knowledge journal. And I really actually love this, because they have the title of the source, anything new or important that they learn about the topic, and then they have to record, how does this add to what I already know? So they might put something as simple as, well, I learned that that many teachers actually think that cell phones can be used in the classroom. How does this add to what I learned already? I thought most teachers would be against it. But there's some processing that goes on here. And also there's room for students. You can give them sources, but there's also room for them if you want them to go online, perhaps find an additional source of their own. So I like this one here. But the key is that we're giving them a place, and whether we are doing it together as a class and recording evidence and vocabulary together, students are doing it in small groups or pairs, or they're doing it on their own, they are collecting. And that is important so that they have something to work with. Structured note taking. This is also Doug Buell. It takes a little bit of time. Look at the way that the text is structured instead of just pulling a graphic organizer, and then create a graphic organizer that helps them get what you want them to get. So one of the texts, for example, it's a key idea, structured note taking. So the question, I put the question in the middle, and then the News ELA text is really organized around 3 key ideas: doctors and researchers using texting, families and friends using texting, and mental health. And the text doesn't exactly go, here's one section, here's another one, here's another one. It kind of goes back and forth between the 3 key ideas. So in that case, I really want to guide them. They're still reading and they are still, recording, but I'm just easing the fact that the text structure the organization is kind of all over the place. And I'm giving them some support to do that. Also, this is a great one, arguments and support. For students, this is so very visual, because what my students would do is they would go, wow, we read that. There's a whole lot of experts that had stuff to say, but there weren't really that many statistics. That's kind of weak. And it's a really concrete way to see like what kind of support might be lacking from something. Paired reviews. Again, oral language is a bridge to writing. 3-minute pause. Partner A summarizes questions and identifies interesting information. Put a stop somewhere in a text, or if you're reading it together as a group, say stop. Okay, 3-minute pause. It's a routine. Partner A gets to say, this is what that section was about. I have some questions. I thought this was really interesting. And then for 1 minute, the partners discuss what partner A said. At the next pause, reverse partners. You can do this in small groups, but a small group only gets. You can give them just a couple minutes to prepare. Maybe, what do we want to summarize? What questions do we want to ask? What do we think is interesting information? They're going to have to work really together to do that. You can give them more time. They can use their notes. Paired verbal fluency. I like this one. It's very fast paced. Partner A talks for 60 seconds about something that they thought was memorable or interesting from the text. Partner B listens, they reverse. Partner B gets 60 seconds, but can't repeat anything partner A recalled. 2, switch to partner A again. Now partner A has 40 seconds to continue the review. Can't repeat. And then finally, 20 seconds. You can adjust the times. I know that sometimes teachers will say, well, that's really fast and that can be really stressful. It's good, especially I did something similar when I was in college studying Russian. And one of the reasons that that professor had us do this is because he wanted us to use the language without sitting there and agonizing over how to say things. He wanted us to just be able to try to talk a little bit off the cuff. It's low stakes. Everybody finds it, a little bit challenging. Like, what am I going to talk about? How am I not going to repeat it? But it's a nice routine where, again, students are just working with the text. They're working with the information. Any activities create a spark. How could you use or adapt the activity for your instructional context? Then we're going to stretch. What do people think about doing these paired activities in an online class? Do any of you pair students up in breakout rooms? What do people think? You can put them into pairs. Now, there's a level of trust, right? That happens. As the teacher, you can't be in every single pair, but you can move around and you can listen. And students don't necessarily have to report back what they talked about. There's value in just doing the activity. Yes. Linda says, I think you really have to know your students for it to be effective. Otherwise, there's a lot of dead air. Absolutely. You as the teacher know which activities are going to work for students. There is a routine as well. Students don't just, I think about like running dictation. If you've ever done that, it becomes a routine. I've seen classes where they're just learning how to do it, and it's very confusing to the class down the hall, our advanced ESL class. And those students, boy, they knew, and they were running, and they had developed that routine, and anyone new into the class, the existing students would make sure that student knew what to do. So breakout rooms with Google Docs for notes so you can see what they're discussing. Yeah. We have to balance. We know that we want to definitely hear what our students are doing, but there are also times when we want them, like a turn and talk. Sometimes at workshops, I'll have teachers turn and talk. And then I know that some of the participants will think, okay, so now are we going to share? No, we don't always share. There's value, right? And I mean, I think about the times that I've been put in a breakout room, and I haven't necessarily been as, as diligent about completing the task as maybe I should have been. Anything else before we break? So paired reviews, using the structured note taking, again, it takes a little extra time. You pre-read and you create a structure that will help students take those notes. I know somebody wrote the rolling knowledge journals. Some way of collecting evidence, because when we ask them to demonstrate, to talk about, to debate, to answer that essential question, what do they have that they have collected that they can use? What vocabulary have they developed or have they collected? I think I lied. One more thing before we do a 5-minute stretch. Check-in. I love doing these with students. And this is something that I can have a slide on an online class, or I can have something that I put up on the document reader or the smartboard. Here we go. Everybody stop. Formative assessment. 7 stems. Choose one. Write in the chat box. I'm thinking, I'm wondering, I'm noticing, I'm picturing, it reminds me of, I'm figuring out, I just learned. There's so much power in taking a few minutes, giving students a sentence stem or a frame, and having them be metacognitive. What are you wondering, Deborah? Please pick one of these and chat, finish it off in the chat box. New reading class. I love developing new things. I'm wondering. Thanks, Deborah. Yeah, ideas. Oh, goodness. Based on the change agent. Oh, the change agent. It's not free, but boy, for what it costs, it's probably the cheapest great curriculum you're ever going to find. Heavy lifting. Elizabeth, thank you for that. We want students can do some heavy lifting. We just want to make sure that we're there and we're supporting them. Yeah. High beginner, ESL high beginner, you need to pull back a little bit. But certainly, if you're using like a graphic organizer, writing at lower ESL levels isn't easy, but remember, if they're taking notes, if you're doing the notes together and they are copying the notes, that's writing. Susan, ask your state to get a curriculum for the change agent. Again, what you get for a very, very little bit of money, you get access to all their back issues electronically. I do not benefit at all. I'm not connected with the change agent. I mean, I know people at World End, but I'm not getting any kickback, right? So, and probably the kickback for how inexpensive the curriculum is would be like 1 cent. Okay, let's take a 5-minute stretch break. Get up, stretch your legs. We come back. We're going to look at some post reading, some options for formative assessment, and some more reflection. Oops. All right. Hopefully everyone is back. A good stretch, cup of coffee, hug your kid, pat your dog. I have 3 dogs. They never really care about what I'm doing until I start a workshop, and then they want to bark. Okay, so, whoops. Hold on here just a moment. And I'm going to get back into one thing I do want to highlight in the chat box, besides the fact that apparently it might be defaulting. So if you post, again, make sure you're posting to everyone. I actually posted myself and didn't post to everyone. So, that technology. One thing I want to highlight is, and this is often it's a comment that just really that makes me really happy, and that was a comment made that the teacher Deborah, she's encouraged that many or much of what she's been doing is right on target, and I think so often I always have an asset lens. Like, I know you're all doing some great things. There's no doubt in my mind. And you may be doing exactly some of these things or pieces of these things or things that aren't in this webinar that I really wish that I knew because they're good things. So I don't know that we get validated enough as teachers. I think a lot of times we hear what we're not doing and what we could be doing better. And it's not that we can't improve always, but I'm always appreciative when teachers are validated that they're doing great things because you are. And again, thinking about how you can adapt these activities and build in supports for students to do these activities or tweak them or just use pieces of these activities. I appreciate all your comments in the chat box. So what do students do post reading? So students just got done working with a text. What do you like to do? What's the first thing you like to do? Or not always, but a go-to strategy when they're done reading a text. How do they work with that? Summarizing. It has been identified as one of the most powerful skills we can teach students for reading. Boy, that's hard. And whether they're orally summarizing, and then if they're writing a summary, they're wrestling with organizing their ideas, using language, and making sure they have key ideas. So we can't do it enough. Summarize and write. Good. And when you have them do summaries, how do you use that information as an instructor? It's you can use it as obviously formative assessment. How do you use that information? I'm running a writing study circle right now, and one of the teachers, she does something, she has them summarize. Depending on the student, she might give them maybe a little paragraph frame to help them organize their ideas. She might use it as an exit ticket, for that day, that formative assessment. She may have them summarize by, answering a question, the key idea, one detail that supports that key idea. And she uses it, Cynthia has it here, to see if they understood what they read. Are they getting what you want them to get? Have them compare their summaries with each other. Linda, could you add a little bit in the chat box, like to compare them for, what are they looking for? Are they looking to see, what details they might have missed? Yeah. Yeah, that's a powerful conversation. To have students compare their summaries and have, one student say, "Oh, I didn't write that part. Like, why did you pick that?" That is a really powerful conversation between students, that makes thinking visible and can really help, especially if one of the students struggles a little bit more with finding the key ideas. That is a really helpful scaffolding conversation with another student. Great. So in Minnesota, we do incorporate the college and career readiness standards among some professional soft skills and digital literacy standards. And so I talk a lot with teachers about text-dependent questions, either creating text-dependent questions. If you use a resource, say Ventures is your book, and looking at, sets of questions. What do you want to keep? What do you want to tweak? What do you want to toss? What do you want to add as far as questions to make them more text-dependent? I have a go-to set of text-dependent questions when I know I want to create some questions quickly, especially questions that are going to help them develop some test-taking skills for, say, the GED, the HiSET, CASA schools, TABE. And this is my go-to set. I've gotten very quick at creating these questions. I don't always use all of them. Sometimes I will take a text if I'm teaching virtually, put a paragraph up from that text and maybe ask 2 or 3 of these questions about that particular paragraph. My first one is, which of the 4 sentences is a summary of the main idea of the text? I usually write 4 choices, one that's, right on the money, one that's too broad, one that's way too narrow, and one that just kind of goes off on a tangent. Which of the following synonyms could replace the underlined word without changing the meaning of the sentence? So I pick something out. This is literally right out of some of our NRS level gain tests. The signal transition word in sentence blank indicates which of the following relationships. I like this because in addition to helping them understand, there's also a writing aspect here that helps when we continually talk about the signal words, what they mean, how they're used. Which phrase best describes how the text is organized? So sometimes I'll get in there and I'll say, compare and contrast, problem solution. Sometimes, depending on how the text is organized, I might say the writer starts with the story and then gives a lot of facts about a particular topic. So sometimes I'll have answers like that. What is the writer telling us when he or she uses the word? That can tap into point of view, tone. What was the writer's purpose in writing the whole thing or in just writing a particular paragraph? How does the visual help the reader to understand the main idea? When we have a text and there's a visual, particularly if it's not necessarily a picture, but it might be some visual information, a chart or a graph or something like that. Sometimes my students will go, "Oh, great, that's great, but really I need to focus on the text." And that's part of what makes text more complex, is understanding that sometimes the visuals are just add-ons. Sometimes they simply emphasize information. Sometimes they add new information. So if we're working on something and whatever is visually represented is actually helping add more information, I really want to draw their attention to that. Inferencing, which statement is most likely true? I have a lot of fun creating those statements. What evidence most strongly supports the writer's claim? That's if we're looking at argument. Again, I don't use all of these. I can use all of these if I want to for a text. Sometimes I just pick 2 or 3 of them to use with students. This is my go-to. I ask other text-dependent questions, but this is my real go-to, like my big bang for the buck. I know I can hit pretty much every key skill that I need students to be thinking about. Quick writes again. This is something you can do this a couple different ways. You can either pose the original question, and students can either start a brand new quick write and then go back and compare, from the beginning, like what's new? What did I learn? Or you can give them a couple minutes to reread what they wrote and then use the time to specifically add any new information. Sense of progress is key to persistence, especially for our learners who might be with us for a while, right? They have to really build their reading, writing, and math skills, for example, to take a high school equivalency, and they're low intermediate, and they're going to be with us for a little while. These opportunities for them to concretely see beyond just level gain tests or moving up a level to see, wow, I've learned stuff, or this is stuff I didn't know before, is really powerful. And same instructions, just that they are now focused on what new things that they learned. Because, but so, this is a deceptively simple activity, but it really it taps in to some different skills. As you can see, because, but so, that's the original activity, right? I've done it with however, yet, and although, so I've done different things depending on what we might be working on, but because, but so is the original. And this is a fairly easy activity to put together once you decide on your kernel sentence. And you decide on your kernel sentence, and then you add because, but, and so. Here I actually added the punctuation before but or so, knowing that students may not actually create a true compound sentence. I go back and forth with that, and then they have to use the word correctly. They have to show a logical relationship and then reflect on what they read. So this is an actual student example. Cell phones can be addicting because we can do so much on them for fun and for everyday life. Cell phones can be addicting, but we can find ways to put them down sometimes. Cell phones can be addicting, so we have to pay attention to how much time we are spending on them. You can easily build some punctuation practice by not using those commas before but and so, and then, having students go back, quickly reminding them what a compound sentence is and using these coordinating conjunctions, and then deciding if they need the comma in their sentence. But it's just a great way for them to do some reflection. And another example here, cell phones can impact the way we live and communicate. Once you create that kernel sentence, then students answer because, but, so. And again, you can switch out the transitions. When I've had students working on semicolons, for example, in my GED prep class, I, would be sure to include at least one that would require knowledge of the semicolon and a comma after the conjunctive adverb. So you can play with this a little bit, but you get some interesting answers. And the key is that the sentence logically makes sense and is related to the text. So here's where some of those images come into play. Again, choice. Choice is really, really important. And I try to give it to students when possible. Connecting key vocabulary with images. You can use less vocabulary. You can, when I do an activity like this, some of my students write a short paragraph. Some of my students just write, 3 or 4 sentences. That's okay. Students kind of come in where they're at. So this is vocabulary here that we would have pulled forward. These are words that appear multiple times in the text that we worked with. These are words that would have gotten attention, that students would have worked with in some way. So this is not the first time that they're dealing with these words. Of course, they can absolutely use a translator, a dictionary, whatever they need to use, but they get to pick the picture, and then they get to do some writing. And I like giving them that choice. I like giving them that ability to make the connections that they want to make while using some of that vocabulary to keep it really focused on the essential question. And of course, I would be doing other activities as well, right? After each text, I would be doing, additional activities. We're just looking through some examples of pre, during, and post activities. Sentence stem session. This is a routine that you can create so easily. And actually, this was a routine that that was introduced in a class I took last year. And the teacher was introducing these different ways, again, that students can interact with text. And it's sentence stem session. That's what I call it. You have a set of sentence stems. And students can read virtually any text, and you get them in small groups. You give them an envelope. They take the sentence stems out. They put them face down on the table. Each student chooses a stem, and then the student uses that stem to say something about the text, whatever. Stems go back in the pile and repeat for another round if necessary. And students are allowed to, when somebody says, one part that reminded me of my own experience was when the text talked about students getting in trouble for texting in class. I remember when I was in high school, whatever. And then students can certainly respond to that as well. It doesn't have to be so structured that the next person goes. It gives them a way to talk about the text. It gives them kind of some of that structure, and it's nice because it's a routine, and you can create these stems in your envelopes and then just get ready to pull them out. It's just a great way to get students talking again and hearing each other's ideas and continuing to build on each other's ideas. These sentence stems are in the handout. Tic-tac-toe. I think there's like a more formal name for this. I think I was in a session once, they said that tic-tac-toe wasn't considered to be an academic enough name for this strategy. And I say, whatever, right? Tic-tac-toe works just fine for me because that's basically what it is, in a way. As teachers, we can choose the key words that we want students to work with. We also can give students the blank. It looks like bingo, but it's not. We can give students the blank one and say, go ahead and add words that you think are really key to what we've been talking about or key from the text. And once either students have the words from the teacher or they have added words, then we ask them to create sentences using the words across, down, or diagonally. I actually, I don't necessarily think I would ask students to do all 9 ways. I might have them do like 3 or 4 ways to make sure that I'm pushing them to maybe work with a set of 3 that's going to be more challenging. But in this case, beneficial, information, social media, okay, create a sentence. They can go down either of these rows. Now we have beneficial, harmful connection. Now we have beneficial cell phones and communication. And again, I like this because it gives the student some choice, but it's also really a higher level thinking activity. They're thinking about using the words correctly. They're working contextualized with the essential question and the content. And it's a very powerful kind of routine that students can do. And again, they can generate the words, or you as the teacher can choose the words for them to work with. So if anyone would like to try this, a couple of you, if you want to write a sentence in the chat, you can go down, across, or diagonally. but create a sentence using one of those sets of 3 words. Try it out. I've also used this when students can do it orally. But I usually follow it up with writing. Like they may do it orally and they may work together to use these words. And then I have them write maybe 1 or 2 sentences that they like. Cell phones can be harmful in the class because it is a distraction from the teacher. Cell phones can be beneficial for communication. Good, it makes sense. Cell phones can be a distraction and be harmful when driving. There's a direct negative connection between teens, cell phones, and social media. And, when you're working with students at different levels, I could say multi-level, but I know I've heard people say, once you have more than 1 student, it's a multi-level class. Good, Ruth, I'm glad. While social media platforms are an acceptable form of communication, they can create distraction from in-depth conversations. Students can come into this where they're at. So if the student says cell phones can be beneficial for communication, that is a logical sentence. You may have some of the higher level students who write more complex sentences or use more complex structures. That's fine as well. Okay, so students can enter where they are. But and especially if you have students fill in their own words, it's a very low prep activity to do post reading. These are great. Cell phones have been beneficial for students to communicate information or questions about homework. I think cell phones just really took a step forward in instruction when COVID hit. Because it really became a key way for students to interact with their teachers, with each other. And so I think that many of us maybe reframed some of the ways that it can be used as a tool. Yes, online classes, absolutely. I can't tell you how many students I've had join me in their car in the parking lot somewhere. And it's always greatly appreciated that they join then, and they will apologize sometimes for calling in from their front seat of their car in the parking lot. And I just say, I'm just so happy that you're here. Thank you for joining us. So a little bit of a review, because I do want to, oh my gosh, student joining class while delivering DoorDash. I got to tell you, probably the one that I will always remember is a colleague of mine. She was teaching class, and the student was attending class Zoom from the phone, and the student chatted to her at one point, "I need to go now. I'm at a funeral and they're bringing the body out." And honestly, I thought, okay, so wow, students are really, really, really accessing learning from wherever they can. And that was one thing I think that I take from COVID. Like, how are we providing as many opportunities as possible for students to connect and to have an opportunity to learn? And that's always in the back of my mind, how we can connect students no matter their context. And that's not an easy question to answer. It has to do with tech skills and staffing and time and all of those things. But I think it showed us some new ways of doing things, some of us. My text set is, in what ways do cell phones impact the way we live and communicate? And my supporting questions were, how do cell phones benefit us and how do they harm us? And then I had multiple kinds of text ways for students to interact, gather evidence, process their understanding. Now, I don't know if you do choice boards. They're really a K-12 concept, but they're making their way into adult ed. Again, this concept of choice, like, I know that students, for example, if your students are high school equivalency students and they're going to have to write an essay for the GED or the high set, yes, they have to learn how to do that. Because they're not going to get an opportunity. They're not going to take the GED reasoning through language arts test and be asked, how would you like to demonstrate your knowledge of these two texts? Okay, that's not going to happen. But there's a lot of value when students have worked for a period of time on an essential question and giving them some opportunities to demonstrate their knowledge. It makes it relevant for students. That choice piece, that agency is really important. This is a summative choice board of 6 options. I'm not saying to use 6 options. I just kept thinking of good or possible options. I've seen this done with 3 options, for example, a speaking option, a writing option, some kind of an option where they can do something with visuals. Choice boards are getting into higher ed. Yep. So think about it, because it is really a great way to give students a choice. So here are some choices. And again, this would be for, kind of an intermediate level. It could go down with supports. Write and conduct a survey of at least 10 people to learn how they use their cell phones and how much time they spend on their cell phones, and then present your data and conclusions to class. Some students like, playing around and creating slides. So give them an opportunity, create a Google slide deck about benefits and drawbacks. Give some examples and, choose your images that connect with your content. It's one thing to choose images. It's one thing to choose images that are really highly connected to the information on your slides. Guess what? We have students who are working on writing the essays. That can be an option, using evidence from the texts we used in class. Create a short guide for parents. This could be something if your students are in family literacy, to advise them about how children can use cell phones in beneficial and positive ways. Create an infographic. I've had students who, again, are a little bit tech savvy, and there's some great simple Canva tutorials around as well, to create, take some of these key text ideas and some visuals and play with color and font, and create a little infographic. There's some really higher level skills going on there, thinking skills. This one I've done, it's been really interesting for students to keep a journal. Record cell phone use for 3 days, including the purpose of using your phone and your mood before and after use. Write a summary of what you discover about your cell phone use and how it is connected to the text. I've had students who are like, wow, I didn't realize how much my mood can change after going on social media. I wouldn't necessarily give, all the time 6 options. And keep in mind, I don't do this. I do this all throughout the year. I don't just do one huge essential question after another. We have other things we do need to do, right? We need to work on grammar. We need to work on, fluency, where we do some things that are separate, other reading strategies. We have all kinds of purposes for reading, mini lessons on content, but this is something that I try to do regularly, a text set, to really kind of contextualize skills and standards. Yeah, I'll tell you what, people are always surprised by how much they're actually using their cell phones. And it isn't to say that it's bad or good. It's just realizing, right? So any of those activities create a spark, or how could you use or adapt the activity for your context? So of course, there's a choice board. There's the tic-tac-toe activity, the sentence stem session, connecting key vocabulary with images. Because but so, it's fairly simple but powerful activity. Quick writes, what have you learned? And having a set of go-to questions that you can draw from when you don't have much time, but you want the questions to connect to particularly standards or level gains. what activity created a spark, or might be similar to something that you do, or something you'd like to try or adapt? Because but so, and sentence stem activities. Don't ever underestimate the power of a low prep activity. Tic-tac-toe and sentence stem session. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. A set of TDQs. Again, sometimes we have time. Sometimes we don't have time, right? So what are some low prep things? Yeah, that tic-tac-toe, it is on the surface, it's low prep, but there's some real thinking, especially when you push students to work with sets of 3 that maybe are a little more challenging. Yeah, to the sentence stems, we actually use those in one of my graduate level classes to talk about text. And it really just provided us a way, you can get graduate students together and say, talk about the text, but we don't necessarily know where to start either. So it gave us a way to an entry in, and it started a conversation. And so it can work at all levels or multiple levels. Yeah, I've used because but so also in content areas. So I've used because but so with science content and also with social studies content. So I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I want to leave a few minutes for questions. And also there are a few minutes. I know that Grayla is going to talk about a few housekeeping things. So some things to remember are to incorporate text sets. Incorporate 1, incorporate 2, try it out. They build knowledge, they develop skills around a topic. They allow for differentiation because you're using text at different levels. You're using texts and activities, whatever those texts might be, whatever form they take, to actually build knowledge, to make other texts on that topic less complex. There can be multiple entry points for students. Develop routines. You've all been expressing that you've got some of these go-to activities, and that's great. Those routines are so important. Sometimes we might feel like, oh, we've been doing this and I'm kind of tired of doing this. Students don't get tired of routines nearly as quickly, I think, sometimes as we might. But the pre-reading, the methods for evidence collection, pick a way and then stick with that way, right? Students talking and writing about texts, the time versus coverage issue. Where can we go deep? I know we have intermittent learners, but we do also have that core group. And we can go deep sometimes, and students can get something. I always include a choice for demonstrating knowledge that a student could do if they'd only been in class 1 or 2 times of that essential question. Where can I add some additional texts? Always thinking of how students are reading, writing, speaking, and listening about that essential question. And what am I doing that my students could be doing? How am I supporting their independence in learning? So just important because but so. I love that little contextualized grammar there. Let's reflect one more time. And I know that some of you have already been saying something from today I plan to try. And I know that you're already kind of reflecting on that, but also consider, please, if you haven't added anything to the chat, also a question I have after today is, and I certainly don't have all the answers, you're also, I encourage you to email me after one I did recently, in Missouri. Something came up about phonics, and I got a question from a participant about phonics resources, and I immediately sent that out to like 8 of our just amazing low-level ESL teachers in Minnesota, and they just came back with so many great suggestions. So I certainly like to to draw on the expertise of the people around me. Yeah. I know there was a ton of ideas, and I hope you can walk away with one idea. I am going to show you something very, very quickly, and then I know we need. Yeah, I'm going to answer that question in just a second, Krista, because you pretty much had the class that I had. What you are going to get once I get the participant list is the following. And I'm going to resume share. That is not what I wanted. Q&A. I've been telling you, it's like 2020 all over again. It just doesn't want to do what I want it to do. Well, what you're going to get is you are going to get, it keeps pausing on me, and I don't know why it's doing that. Okay, well, sorry. What you're going to get again is you're going to get a PDF of these slides. You are going to get all these activities that we talked about in an adaptable Google Doc. It's like 12 pages long, including the sentence stems, including those key questions to ask yourself when planning, the text-dependent questions, all of it. And so how much time do you spend on an essential question? My class was 3 hours twice a week. And some of that time I use specifically about 45 minutes of that for STAR, the student achievement in reading. And often the activities, the fluency, vocabulary, comprehension activities that I did would be around that same essential question. So those students got a little extra support with background knowledge and vocabulary. But I would say an essential question like this, especially if I was giving students some, giving them a little bit of work to do in the open lab or on their own. Of course, students do varying degrees of homework. I would probably spend maybe 5 or 6 weeks, which seems like a huge amount of time. But keep in mind that if you're teaching reading and writing and language, you're also incorporating those activities. You are contextualizing as much as you can. I know that sometimes it can feel like, but we've got so much we need to do. But how can students be doing those language development activities and low stakes writing and vocabulary learning and comprehension strategies? How can they be doing those within that text set? Because in the end, I was covering a lot of things, and I don't know that my students beyond short-term memory, how much they actually took with them. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, everyone. So much expertise in this group. And thank you for the great ideas. I love getting ideas, and I encourage, you're doing some great things. I always encourage teachers to consider presenting PD. A lot of us think we're not doing anything that's groundbreaking. I guarantee that every single one of you is doing something that would be an eye opener and an asset to any teacher. Grayla, I know you have some things to talk about.
Yes, I do. And the first thing is to say thank you so much for sharing your fount of knowledge. This was just wonderful. And as so many people said, there is so much in here. So thank goodness you're willing to share all these activities with us. I think this has just been wonderful. I was sitting here saying, oh my gosh, I miss teaching. So it was that inspirational. So wanted to just remind everyone that you will get an evaluation at the end of this webinar. It's just going to pop up. Please complete that. It is a feedback gift for Kristine. And then your proof of attendance is going to be sent to you through Zoom, and that will be for each session that you have attended. Also want to remind you that the recording of this will be available on our YouTube channel. The date for that release is to be determined, but we'll be sure to let you know. And also look forward to getting all of these documents and activities from Kristine We're going to get the list of participants to her so that she can send that out to you. Thank you for your participation. It's been great. I learned a lot from the audience and participants as well as Kristine. So thank you.
And again, my email, please feel free to email me. That's a big part of my job, is connecting people, connecting resources. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. Thank you for everything in the chat box. It was excellent. I am saving my chat right now. Can I save my chat? Yes.
I think you can, yes.
Yes, I will put my email in the chat. Absolutely. Thank you for, I see adapting for ESL. Some of these activities actually were originally created for ESL, but yep, remember, you know your students best, and you know how best to tweak activities so that they're doable and they're stretching too.
All right, great. If there's nothing else, we say thank you again for presenting, being a part of VTI 7.0. Take
Thank you
care.
for asking me again.
Oh, and we will again, so be assured. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day.